If a 5-year-old came up to you and asked, "What does an obstacle mean?" what would you say? I once heard that every obstacle presents an opportunity for improvement. That is so true. When going through obstacles in life, it is a mindset on how you think. Don't wish things were easier. Wish you were better, and then go out there and become better. In life, one of the best ways to teach is to tell a story. The story I'm going to tell you here today is real. It is not made up. The story I'm going to tell you comes directly from an autobiography by a guy by the name of Legson Kayira. The title of the book that he wrote is called I Will Try. When it comes to having obstacles in life, you will learn a lot from what I'm going to tell you in this story, especially when obstacles come your way. You will be relentless in pushing forward despite any obstacle in life, because you will develop confidence if you really wanted to achieve it, to get over it. Let me ask you, what is the furthest distance you have walked to a destination? Do you know the distance from Oakland to Los Angeles is about 397 miles? Do you know the distance from Oakland or San Francisco to Atlanta is about 2,500 miles? Well, Legson walked 2,500 miles in Africa. Why? He wanted to go to college in America. You see, when he was born, his mom abandoned him and placed him in a river. Another woman saw what happened and saved him. He was given the name of the river he was tossed in, which was called Didimu. Legson grew up in the country of Malawi, which is near South Africa. He did not grow up in an ideal situation. He states that his parents would wear the same piece of cloth for 3 to 4 years before being unable to pin them together. Saturdays, his family would go hunt for wild animals to eat. As a kid, he slept with other boys in the village in a barn with the cows, and at night would get peed on while they slept. His parents didn't even go to the first grade, he said. And they couldn't even write their own names, and they could not count past 20. Let me ask you, what can you buy with 6 pennies? Well, that is how much elementary school cost for him. It took his parents several months to save enough to put him in school. And at school, there were no paper, pens, and books. Students did their work by scratching their fingers on the dirt with a piece of grass, or they used wood. Legson didn't like going to school at first. He tried quitting, but his parents made him stay because of the money they had paid out so he can go to school. He said, I quote, "The school meant very little to me at the time. I would have been most of happy if there were no school at all." End quote. He ended up quitting school without his parents knowing. One day his dad got a letter. Legson had to read it to him. Legson said principal wanted to see him. His dad found out that he was getting fined for not sending Legson to school. His dad had no money, couldn't pay it. Someone loaned him the money. So now Legson went back to school. Legson noticed that his classmates had English-sounding names, and at the time, when he was learning English, he took pride in few words he knew. He boasted that he would learn as much English as possible and to be able to speak it much better than those who actually taught him English in school. He gave himself the name of Legson. He never knew anyone with this name. It just popped in his head and it stuck with him. One school he went wanted students to wear khaki shorts and a shirt. Legson didn't have that. He said at the time, all he wore was a white cloth that was so dirty that no matter how many times you washed it, it will never be white again. He wore the cloth as a blanket at night. He got a job requiring him to travel for 3 weeks. With the money, he bought a blanket. And he was said to be the first person in his family to own a blanket, he said. People in his village started to talk to his dad, saying if he let him continue to go to school, others would be jealous. The dad knew if he failed the examinations, he wouldn't be permitted to go back to school. So the dad talked to him one day and said, I fear they're going to try to kill you, my son, because you keep passing your tests. Do you know what you should do? Legson asked what? His father said, you should fail your tests, write all wrong answers, and that way no one will bother you anymore. Legson said, I'm not going to do that, he thought to himself, because tests were like competitions, and he would be laughed at. If he passed, he would be admired by many, rather be ridiculed, and plus no one will believe his failure. He did well in school and on exams and wanted to go to a high school, but was denied. He was told he was too young. He tried another school and was told it was too expensive. Then he got a letter from a person at a school named Livingstonia, 200 miles away from his village. The letter said, Dear Legson, you have passed your examination with high marks, and I understand you do not have money to go to a high school. I shall help you through, so that in turn you will help someone. So word got around his village that he was going to school. He said a few congratulated him, and some even said there is no end to learning. Why don't you just quit school now and get yourself a job and earn some money? You might just keep going on to school and die without even making use of your learning. Legson said, quote, I reflected on my life and saw a boy born to a poor family marching on the road of poverty, the road on which thousands of millions of people had marched before me, and many more will march after me. But I saw myself as one of the very few fortunate ones of those millions of poor people, for although I was poor, I was permitted to go to school, end quote. At this time, he was in school for just 9 years and not satisfied with just little education. His dad had died, and now his family depended on him. Since the school required that he live there, he tried talking to his mom, saying that going to school will be better for him, to get opportunities, to get paid more. His mom agreed, and he went to a neighbor to borrow a pen. He tore a piece of paper and wrote that he would accept the offer. On the first day of school in the 9th grade, he noticed 75% of kids had shoes on. He was barefoot. He got to school, it was like a dorm where you stayed there. At night, he was cold and had that one blanket. Bed that he slept on was made out of bricks with a cement top. He wore the same clothes for several weeks. Classmates felt bad for him and gave him a shirt, and some shared their soap with him. Eventually, the school provided uniforms with the school motto on the left pockets of the shirt saying, I will try. While at high school, Legson had a friend named Harton who would read anything that came his way and find time to read textbooks for school. He would read and people would ask him about it. And he would say, read, boys, read. Sometimes he would actually tell others what he read. Legson said he told the stories with so much feeling that you suppose he was there firsthand. One time, Legson remembered, and I quote, this is what I call real faith, the faith that really helps one to strive to his goals. Someone asked Harton, what do you mean? To explain what it is that he called real faith, he said, Abraham Lincoln. He said, Abraham Lincoln was born a very poor man, poorer than most of us, but he had faith. He had confidence. it was asked, what did he do? Hardin said, read, boys, read. Legson said Lincoln intrigued him. He said he had never, and I quote, dreamed there was a person who was poorer than I was, yet who in the course of his life had accomplished much more and far above the powers of ambition. I had always thought myself poor. I had pitied myself for being poor. I used my poverty to explain my inability to do something. I am poor. I would always excuse myself. I felt ashamed for having a material poverty to impede my schoolwork and any other work. Perhaps I thought it is not too late to correct the situation. End quote. He said the land of Lincoln as the place as where one went to get freedom and independence. You see, at the time, England ruled over that country where he was born from in Africa. Legson said, quote, one day I will also go there. I would also go to school there. And I will also return home to do my share in the fight against colonialism. Side point, do you notice how confident he was? He stated in advance what he's going to do. Although he didn't have the means, he was confident. He had faith. All right, picking up on the story. So Legson then learned that at the end of high school, only a few from where he was from went overseas to college. But that didn't stop Legson. He had confidence. He said this, quote, I will go to the United States. I will put the blame for the meager higher education we got. Unquote. Since Legson had been away from home for some years in high school, he feared his mom would not let him go away alone to the USA. He knew she did not know anything about the United States, and she would not know where it was and how far it was. He thought if he told her until a few days, possibly 2 days before he was due to leave, perhaps he could persuade her to let him go. If he told her with more time, she would have time to ask how far the United States was and then try to make him stay. So he kept his plans to himself. One day while home after high school, a friend asked him what he was going to do with his life. Legson said, I'm going to America. Notice the confidence. I'm going to America, he said. So the friend said, are you mad? Why? How? How are you going to get there? Who are you going to get money from? Who will take care of your mother? Are you not tired of school? What, do you want to be a white person? Do you have a passport to go to another country, let alone the United States? Legson had obstacles presented to him. He didn't have a passport, but he had confidence. That didn't stop Legson. He said, and I quote, he would go as far as he could without a passport and then try to get one. He didn't want to apply for one because they would ask how much money he had, how he was going to travel. And when he would say he didn't have any money, they would say there was no passports for me. The friend asked, does your mother know about this? Legson said, I was just joking. I'm not going anywhere. End quote. Now, when he got home, his mom was home. He noticed she needed a new cloth. The one she was wearing was falling apart. She had been wearing the same cloth for 3 years. The same piece of clothing for 3 years, I said. His brother and sister needed new clothes too. Plus, they would be going to school and needed school fees. He thought maybe he was being unwise and selfish by leaving his family in such a poor condition. His mom thought he would come back, be a teacher by now, and expected for him to help. Having a son who was a teacher would give her pride, he said. But I quote, he says, I was going to disappoint them all. He was ready to tell his mom. That he was going to leave. He had 2 world maps, one printed, and one he hand drew in the 6th grade. He heard his mom talking to her friends about whether he was going to teacher's training school. He then sat her down and told her his plans, that he will leave to America. Later, he had another conversation with someone he knew who heard about him saying that he was going to America. They said if he went to America, he will be too educated and will become too lazy to do anything. He won't even work his own garden. Won't know how to build a house. Then there were some that supported him, saying if he went, he would come back an important man. His mom was listening. They talked about America being few miles away. They wanted to know how he was going to get there. He said, walk and work on the way. They asked, how long would it take someone? 5 days maybe, Legson said. Legson agreed, trying to give his mom the impression that it wasn't far away. Legson's mom said that his brother and sister will be going to school. Where do you think they will get school fees? I was going to get jobs on the way and send money each year to help finance schooling. The night before he left, he laid in bed mapping out his route. He would go to Egypt and work on his way on a ship to New York. When he left, men were sharpening their spears and axes to go hunting. Women preparing to go to the well for water. He talked to the men who thought the continent was a legend one hears who heard it from someone else. So here's the day he left, October 14th, 1958. He left with his old school uniform, the one with the badge that says, I will try, barefoot. He had a blanket, he had some flour, an axe, and the Bible. His mom walked with him a mile. They stopped. He shook her hand, and she spit in his face, which was their version of kissing in his village. It was a token of love to spit in the face, goodwill and remembrance. Now, Legson was all by himself. The first day, he had so much energy, feeling like he was going to America that evening. While walking, he saw the Didymu River. In that river, he was once tossed by his mother. He sat at the top of the mountain, saw his old village in the river, and began to reflect, thinking. His mom had 9 kids, and 6 have died before he left. He realized that he stated, and I quote, this journey started with the greediness for learning. End quote. 16 days later, he reminded himself it was only the beginning. I quote, for America, it was far away. I would try, said my shirt, but it was dirty. All my clothes were dirty. I was dirty. As he traveled, he would repeat the words on his shirt. I will try. I will try. Keep thinking about his trip to America. He said, it may take 2, 3, 5 years, but I will get there. End quote. Once again, notice his confidence. Now, it says, all right, typically he would go from village to village looking for work and food. When he got to his first city, Legson carried a recommendation letter from his high school to show people as he looked for work. He didn't have experience. He began to think, who would care about Livistonia here? The problem was, who would train me? And was only looking for a temporary job that lasts few weeks to a few months. Granting he would get paid during training. Can't just leave after getting trained. People read the letter and said they had no openings. One evening, he said if he spoke Swahili as well as he did English, it would be different. He got rejected constantly. One time, business owner said, I don't need a clerk. Legson said, what do you need? Nobody, said the business owner. Frustrated, Legson ended up tearing up the letter. You would think that once he got a job, he would buy food or save for future expenses, but no. Legson one time had a job washing plates, earned enough to buy a physics book that had answers in it. And that's what he did with his money. While going from village to village, city to city, he kept remembering that north was to his right. He felt he was wasting his time if he stayed in one place at a time. He would see trains and wave at people on the train, wishing he was able to afford to ride on it. He says, I quote, he felt jealous over the people who were inside, stretching their legs back, taking naps, and eating on the train. The train had no time for a penniless little schoolboy, and they would reach their destination by sitting down. I would reach my destination by counting my steps, and someday I would reach my destination. I had to please myself by extolling my situation, by putting emphasis only on achieving my goal, my destination, and not how I attained it. End quote. 2 years later, Legson was still on his journey to go to America. He was in the country of Uganda. He got there by taking a boat. When he got off the boat, government officials there were asking for people to provide their passports. They were saying passports, passes, passports. And then he can hear to the left a man saying, schoolboys this way, please. He then walked in with the same crowd of the schoolboys and passed the customs, he said, and I quote, I got to Uganda, my temporary destination, but America was my goal, was still far away across land and ocean. I told my friends that when I got to Uganda, I would know what to do. But I did not know what to do. I pulled out my map, and with his fingers, he saw how far he traveled and realized how much more was needed. He said, I had come this far, there's no turning back now. I try to console myself. I pity myself for taking such a journey. The motto on my shirt said, I will try. So 2 years later, he's still wearing the same shirt. I repeated those words thousands of times. My shirt was dirty. My shorts was dirty. I was dirty. I must find a job, end quote. One day, when looking for work, he was wandering around. He came across the British Library. He would come by whenever he was free to read. He couldn't borrow any books because he was not a member and it required a fee to be a member. To go to the library and just read was free, which he liked. He would walk 5 miles one way to the library, spend a few hours reading, and then walk back. One February morning, he went to go to mail a letter home. And on the way, a guy approached him and said, haven't I seen you somewhere around here? Legson said, I don't know. He remembered that people he used to hear about would come and talk to you and pretend like they know you, then rob you. The guy persisted. Were you not in the British Council Library last week? Legson said, and I've been there a couple times and will probably go there later. The guy asked, have you been to all the libraries? Legson said, I thought it was the only one. The same library he saw him at. The guy said, you should try the American library. It's nice. Legson said, you mean to tell me there is an American library? The guy said, yes. As a matter of fact, that's where I'm going now. Legson said, forget going to the post office. Can I go with you to the library? And he said, sure. Legson thought that just by being in the library, the fact that it was operated and ran by the Americans would give him a sense of being near America. He got in the library and began reading a magazine left on the table. The guy he was with said, you know, they don't charge you anything for being a member here. Legson said, well, it's because they don't lend books. So they figure it's unreasonable to charge any fee for a membership. The guy said, no, they lend books. They will give you a card and you can check out books for free. Legson got excited and the librarian had to tell him to calm down. He was making too much noise. The day that changed everything for Legson was when he finally got his card. He went back to the library to check out some books. There was a book lying on the table. He picked it up, closed it, and looked at the title. The book, The Enduring Lincoln. Remember earlier as a student, there was another student who told them about the story of Lincoln and how Legson thought there was no one who was poor as him, and how that story motivated him learning about Abraham Lincoln. Now he had a book in his hand. He came across the word moribund when he was reading the book. He went to look for a dictionary for the meaning, and instead of finding that book, he came across a book called The American Junior Colleges. He stopped all he was doing, opened up the book with shaky hands, not caring where it opened, and it opened to Skagit Valley Junior College in Washington State. He copied down the address. That same day, he used his money he was going to spend on food to send a letter asking for a scholarship. He didn't know if they would accept. He didn't care. He was happy knowing he had a book from which he can get as many addresses as he could in America and apply to as many as possible. 2 weeks later, after sending the letter to Skagit, he got a reply back telling him what he needed to do to get admitted to the school. Ironically, that letter had a stamp of Lincoln on it. He read the letter over and over and over. He says, I quote, I heard of America, I had read of America, I had dreamed of America, but this was coming from America. I couldn't believe it, end quote. A few days after getting his passport, he was still carrying his old bag with the same 2 books. Now he had 2 shirts, 1 pair of shorts, and a thermos cup. He was now wearing shoes. He had misplaced his map. This was all in one piece of luggage he had. He said, I quote, I reminded myself that the journey was very still long and that there was no need to hurry. I walked on the road and on paths and paths that led to nowhere, end quote. He bought a pound of sugar in case while traveling he couldn't find food he could use it for energy, he said. He quotes, when driven almost angry by a torture of hunger, I would settle for a sip or 2 of water mixed with sugar and drink it in the thermos cup, end quote. He sat on a rock one day, soaking his feet in the river. A guy was near and introduced himself as Mr. Lumba. Legson told him his name, and after a good discussion, Mr. Lumba asked where he was going. Legson had nothing to hide. I'm going to America. Lumba said, what do you know? I'm going there too next year. He was going there to study science, and his community was sending him. Legson started to wonder, why didn't my community send me? He got to the country of Sudan and the city of Khartoum. He was tired, weak, and hungry. Not knowing anybody in the city, he went hunting for the American embassy to try to get an American visa. He said that if they refused him here, he would try again in Cairo, Egypt. He said he didn't ask people for directions because he couldn't speak Arabic. And he would walk aimlessly, sometimes coming back to the same streets where he had left before. Then from a distance, he saw the American flag and started to run towards the building. He took the stairs, and when he got to the office, the lady in the office told him, what are you doing? Because he came up there breathing so hard. Now, fortunately, the phone rang, so he was able to gain his breath. So the lady got off the phone and said, how can I help you? He says, yes, I'm going to America, and I want a visa. The lady said, do you have the 120? And then Legson says, what's the 120? Legson didn't have the form and didn't even know what it was. The lady said he couldn't get a visa without it. She said the college should have sent the form. She says, I'm sorry, but I can't help you without this form. Legson was disappointed and angry. Legson stood up to go, looked at the wall with a map of America. He thought Cairo would most likely tell them the same thing. A guy in the office came. Then the lady started to tell him how it was funny for someone to come here without a 120 to get a visa. The guy did not think what she said was funny. He came and sat down to talk to Legson and took him to another person's office so that he could talk with him. The guy started asking questions like, where is he from? Where is he trying to reach in America? Legson told him, Skagit College. The guy said, you got any correspondence with you? Legson said, yes. He unfolded 2 letters and handed them to him. He read them and said, okay, how do you intend to get to America? Legson said, walk to Port Said in Egypt and work on my way on a ship to New York. The guy said, walk? How did you get here from your home? Walk most of the way. The guy said, hold up. When did you leave your home? Legson said, 1958. The guy says, what time in 1958? He said, October. So the guy looked at the wall and had a map on it. Then he wrote something on a piece of paper. He left the room, leaving Legson sitting in the office. Legson kept wondering how he would get the form. Then he returned back. Do you have any money? Legson says, about £5, sir. Anything else? He says, like 2 shirts, a pair of shorts, and 2 books. Any shoes? He lifted up his legs, showing his shoes had holes all in them. It's colder in America, the guy said, and he couldn't see how he could expect to walk on snow with holed-up shoes. Legson said, I would, because he didn't even know what snow actually was. Looking at the map in Africa, the guy says, where's your home? Legson showed him. They looked, they couldn't find it. When they finally found it, the guy says, well, you don't have the 120, and that the regulations require that an applicant have enough money for a round trip, and you don't have that. You only have about $140. Basically, that's what £5 was. Then said it was only reasonable that he should go back home. Legson didn't say a word, but in his mind he says, never, no, not now, end quote. The guy gave him a piece of paper and asked him to write out what he told him. Write his story. Legson did. The guy got the letter and then wrote to the dean at Skagit College in Washington State. And this is what the letter said, and I quote, Legson told me a story which is amazing. It is a classic example of a person's desire for education, and as such warrants more than routine attention and assistance. He has been walking from his land almost 2,500 miles and appears undaunted by the prospect that his journey has barely begun. Embassy is faced with unpleasant and perhaps impossible task of discouraging him. As you are aware, certain conditions must be met before a student may be issued a visa to the United States. The only way this can be possible is if he gets financial and moral support from your community who will be interested in helping him. Someone will have to guarantee his round-trip passage and not become a public charge in the United States. All he has are the clothes on his back and £5. My first reaction to Legson was that this was out of the question, and he should go back home. But after looking at the map and seeing how far he traveled, seeing what he has done thus far, going through half of Africa, my conscience would not allow for me to drop it without first satisfying myself that there is no hope. He has unbelievable hardship with only the smallest prospect of reaching his goal. He needs you to provide the 120 in money. Response from you is required, ASAP, end quote. So Legson got a letter from the college in Washington State. He found out that there were fundraisers to get him money to come. There was radio and newspapers publicizing about Legson. He even did an interview with Time magazine about his journey. Finally, he got money to travel to America. Had a check in his hand, and he said his lips quivered, his hands shook. He felt overjoyed. For 2 years, he says, I have wandered from strange place to strange place. Now I will wander no more. On December 16th, he was at the airport. He said the big jet came thundering in the dark, trembling and loud, and he saw it land. He was afraid the pilot would not be able to see because it was night and get lost or forgot fuel. He got to New York. When he got off the plane, he heard a mysterious voice saying, Legson Kayira, Legson Kayira, come to the counter. He stopped, looked back, and saw a few people, but did not know me any more than he knew them. He heard the voice again, then looking around, shouted, I am here. I am here. He ended up figuring out it was an intercom. And he went back to the counter. When he got outside, reporters were waiting on him. It was snow on the ground. They took pictures of him holding snow. He later flew to Washington, D.C. And traveling to Lincoln Memorial, he said, he visited, he says, and I quote, there was my hero in a far distant land, a land he had never seen. I had heard of him. I had read of him, and I had adored his devotion to duty and his dedication to a cause. Upon hearing of his endurance, upon reading of his struggles, I had resolved to re-examine myself, rediscover myself. As he had once said that whatever he was and whatever he became, he owed to his mother. So perhaps the least I can say as I stood before him was that whatever I will become, I owe to him. In all, it took him 2 years to walk 2,500 miles from his village to the place where he left for America. He expressed, and I quote, when God put an impossible dream in your heart, he means to help you fulfill it. I believe this to be true when, as an African bush boy, I felt compelled to become an American college graduate. He eventually got a degree from the University of Washington, then went to Cambridge in London to get another degree and worked for the London government for 20 years. He died October 14, 2012. Ironically, the same day he left his village 54 years previous. He left his village October 14th. He died October 14th. In conclusion, if you recall what got Legson motivated to better himself, it was by reading. He read books that inspired him, that gave him confidence. He had that motto on the shirt that says, I will try. He had the self-talk. He had the belief. You see, when you learn from others, you learn from their experience. The thing to remember is this. If they can do it, you can do it. If Legson never took the initiative to want to be better, he would have been stuck in that village. Look at you right now, where you are. Look at you right now, you are in a position. So what are you doing with your life? You see, Legson believed he would be successful. He believed to achieve. What do you believe about yourself? 5 years from now, what will your life look like? What will you be doing? How do you display confidence? Be like Legson. Push when there's no way out. Be like Legson. Push when the odds are stacked against you. Be like Legson. Push when obstacles appear tall as mountains. Be like Legson. Use confidence to overcome obstacles. Now, Legson had his badge on his shirt that says, I will try. He learned he went through severe obstacles, right? But what pushed him is all his belief. He visualized himself. So I want you to do the same when obstacles come your way in life, because believe me, they will come. And when they do, just like Legson, motivate yourself to overcome obstacles with confidence. Legson used to say to himself, I will try, but I want for you to say something a little bit different. I want you to say, I can and I will when obstacles come your way. Go ahead, say it right now. I can and I will. Say it. I can and I will. Say it. I can and I will.